Go back to Bye Bye Biden
without him.
Wait,
yeah,
wait.
Dude.
Did you like my sign?
I do.
You like my sign?
I do. That is really good. I'm going to start calling him Bye Done.
Right. Biden equals Bye Done. Right? Because, I mean.
I love it.
I mean, look, to me, I still think this was a soft coup, right? How do you put the president out there without knowing that this was going to be there? And by the way, here's the real question. Can you imagine if he wasn't pumped up with something like Adderall, which he clearly was, how bad this would have been?
I can't fathom, honestly, Robert. And as a person who happened to have partaken in uppers at one time or another in my life, I know, shocking, hard to believe, but true nonetheless. I mean, people were like, oh my God. And I'm like, that is a sign that someone is on drugs, that wide-eyed, non-blinking, giant pupil, like that is a sign someone is on drugs. So I don't know, maybe, it's probably not like Adderall or meth. It's probably some special something developed by the military, but I don't know. Robert. And
I understand that Dr. Wolf is with us. So, ladies and gentlemen, joining us, because I'm going to segue hard, right?
Actually, I'm not.
Yep. Lord Benjamin says he is. So let's bring him on, because this is really what I was excited to talk about today. So, Dr. Wolf, new book, Not a Real Enemy. It's a personal journey of his family's flight from Hungary to this country, surviving the Holocaust, surviving communism. And it's a compelling story. Dr. Wolf, thank you so much for joining us on Of the People.
Hi, nice to meet you, and appreciate you having me. Thank you so much. I'm very honored and blessed to be a guest here.
And we are honored and blessed to have you. In this country, with the rise of anti-Semitism, these personal stories and these personal triumphs of life over oppression are so very important. So this book won an award, right? It was let me see if I got this right, the Silver Nautilus Book Award and several other awards. This is a story about your father and your grandfather, correct?
It is. And plus, my dad's parents, my grandfather and mother, both killed at Auschwitz, unfortunately, at age 50.
Sorry.
While my dad was at forced labor camp. My mom's grandfather, too, a rabbi, was also killed at Auschwitz. A real threat to society. And my dad's dad was a dentist who couldn't be a doctor because he was Jewish, but they were kind of blended in together anyway. And he was a captain on a Red Cross ship in World War I. So my dad's parents did Hungary a lot of service, as did my dad, too, before they decided to leave. So, and Not a Real Enemy. Yeah, we've won several awards, 4 awards, which I'm very proud of that. But I'm not the type to sit on my laurels and say, this is good enough, because it means a lot. It means that people recognize the importance of our work and the quality of our work. And I owe that to a great team. My co-author, Janice, did an amazing job with the book. Our publisher, our publishing house, Amsterdam Publishers, this is their specialty, is Holocaust and related, although this book covers little-known Hungary and obviously World War I all the way to the end of the Hungarian Revolution.
That's an interesting point that you make, Dr. Wolf, is we don't hear much about the other countries involved in World War II, involved in Nazi Germany and those things. You hear a lot about, Germany, and, maybe France, or maybe a little bit of Italy, maybe a little bit of Russia. But what do you think made your folks coming from Hungary different? Like, how do you think that changed the story?
Well, that's such a great point. I mean, we all know about Okinawa and Midway and the bombing of Normandy and London and Germany and the end of the war. But we don't know a lot about Lithuania or Croatia or even Ukraine compared to, say, now. And even now, it seems like such an obscure, faraway place that it's so remote that it's almost imaginary. But my parents were Hungarian, and they were devout Hungarian people. They loved Mother Hungary, but they wouldn't buy into totalitarianism. They didn't like the right. They didn't like the left. They hated the Nazi Party, and why wouldn't you? Jewish or otherwise, right? Something to teach these Hamas sympathizers is that the Nazis were no friends of yours either. So keep that in mind. We can talk about that for an hour. But and neither are the communists. I mean, Putin threatening nuclear war every other day and this kind of thing. And that's part of the reason that I don't think America got too involved with Hungary in 1956, the Hungarian Revolution. It's another topic of discussion. But yeah, it's the book was so amazing, and so few people know about Hungary. I mean, hardcore historians, World War II historians certainly do. But the twist on this is it's my dad's viewpoint of it, my dad's biography that I converted from an autobiography that he and my mom wrote in the 70s. And they wrote the stories as though they had happened the previous day. They were very sharp. They were educators. They were Holocaust educators. They were also well-rounded people that loved arts and music and museums and travel, education, all those things. But so they wrote the autobiography, and I converted to a biography a few years ago.
Right.
We've got some great pictures that were shared from the book, Dr. Wolf. Who was the person? Yeah, who was the person who escaped from imprisonment twice? My
dad. It's imprisonment. It's a weird. I mean, I've always think of imprisonment as being a captor, a captive, but it's not. My dad escaped 4 times actually. So I mean, four awards and 4 escapes. Twice from during Nazi Hungary. So that was my father. Younger picture while he's still had some hair, but super nice guy. He and his friend Frank escaped in the middle of the Carpathian Mountains in the cold thicket of the wintry hills. Just took off from. They thought it was a death march. They knew that the war was almost over. They didn't know who was going to win. They didn't know if they wanted to end up in Austria or Hungary because they were near the Austrian border. But if the Nazis would have won, my dad and his friend would have been screwed probably. And if the Russians won or the Romanians or whatever other renegades were helping them, then they were probably better off in their homeland. So, but they had heard basically about death marches, which we don't hear about in Hungary and Ukraine. That's another thing. We heard about them in Okinawa, but they happened in continental Europe as well. So they thought this was it, and so they had about a 3-day window to take off, and that's just what they did. They got to the front of the line, as far away from the guards as they could, waited till almost dark, and then just took off. And you can feel the cold, you can feel the thicket, you can feel the thistles cutting in his hands and in his body. You can feel the fear and that second guessing that he had. It's all the way the description was. And again, I owe that to my dad doing the story and pouring his emotions out, but also my co-author for helping me enliven the book, because our initial version of the book was not really accepted by publishers and authors. She turned it more to conversation and that kind of thing. So Second Escape was I can't say not as exciting, because it was amazing timing. It was in front of Nazi headquarters in Budapest, Hungary, and they just came up with a last-minute plan, and they came up with some crappy reading material for some of the guys at the front office, a pack of cigarettes, and used the opportunity to fly through the door. Perfect timing between soldiers, got on a streetcar and gone. And and then the 2 more escapes under communist regime. A little spoiler is that my dad missed an escape under communist Hungary, felt the most unlucky guy in the world, went to the wrong train station, and everybody who made that train got arrested, including his medical school roommate. So if you can believe the luck on this guy, to use a Sopranos type of expression, the luck on this guy is unreal. So, and millions of miracles in between, not just the escapes, cloak and dagger stories, hiding places that you wouldn't expect, wearing women's clothing, hiding in casinos, arguing with armed Russian soldiers. So all kinds of stories that amazing. How
there's some great imagery, great photography. You're talking about armed soldiers,
Most of these are civilians. These are photos from the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, which was a short war, about 2.5 weeks. Not a lot of people knew about it. It started by college kids, basically, and a radio station. There was just an uprising, and other Eastern European countries were doing. This is one of my favorite photos. It's just these guys are just ready to go. I mean, and the government couldn't decide if they were with the rebels or if they were the Russians. But the Russians ended it pretty swiftly by bringing in their tanks. They thought the Russians teased them too. They said, "We're going to let you have free reign," and they end up reneging on their promise and rolling in with the tanks. And next thing you know, your communism is here to stay. And that's when my parents said, enough is enough. Enough persecution, enough oppression. They had an illegal Jewish wedding in Hungary that wasn't allowed under the Soviet regime. And their host, my mom's uncle, a doctor, got arrested for that. So that's a chapter in itself. Hauled away to prison for a year, and they tried to pin the Raoul Wallenberg murder on him, and he wouldn't confess to it. So they tortured him for a year. It was a really, really sad thing.
Well, and isn't it interesting, Dr. Wolf, to hear you talk about what your grandparents and your ancestry, what they were dealing with lawfare, right? And we see that actually today. Our government and nefarious forces in the United States are using lawfare in the same way that it's been used in the past to basically, go after your political enemies, real or perceived.
Yeah, it's really sad. I mean, the big lesson in the book is I don't want to take, I'm not a big political guy. I'm maybe a little bit right of center. I like reasonable. I don't like extreme right, extreme left. The book will explain why. But no, I don't like when people use political gain as their motivation. I've really had it. But one of the messages in the book is we still shouldn't take for granted how good we have in this country. We're still allowed to vote. We still have choices. We can still write our government and our mayors, and we can plead for. And I don't feel like the police here or the government or the military is after me because I'm Jewish, or my next door neighbor because he's Asian or Muslim or whatever. I don't feel that, which is what you felt. There were no, the government was your enemy back in Hungary, whether it was Nazis and even worse, the Hungarian government was worse than the Nazis. They had the police. The police were worse, and the killing of the innocent people on the Danube right at the end of the war. They had no reason. It went well for Schindler's people, right? At the end, they just they left. The soldiers just took off and let them alone. Didn't work out like that in Budapest. So it was just really awful. How do people get that kind of hatred where they're killing for pleasure? And you can compare what's going on now with the Hamas supporters. I'm not saying Palestinians deserve to live a good life too. I mean, the ones that are not warmongers, the ones that don't want death to Israel or Jews, that's fine. But you don't have a right to come into my neighborhood. You don't have a right to block my synagogue. I wrote a little bit about that today when we were talking about the podcast on social media, and we'll expound on that. But that's the difference between the governments, and at least we can still vote. But it's scary now, even that. It's rigged. It's not working right. There's votes missing. I mean, we're always arguing about something. I wish I saw more cohesiveness in our country. I guess that's the word like we had 9/11 and even World War II, whereas now COVID split us up, and people forget that 9/11 was American targets. They weren't Jewish targets. So it was hardcore Muslims that were. And people should just indiscriminately blame the Muslims for 9/11 either, because I have a lot of Muslim friends, and they're not all.
Well, and that's, Dr. Wolf, ultimately what we have to be careful of is allowing for the government or news media to make our choices for us. And that's really what I hear you saying is how do we actually treat each other like neighbors and human beings without letting other people tell us what to think about each other. I think that would be an excellent start.
I agree. Herd mentality is it's a nightmare. It's a disaster, and we're seeing
it is.
And people not doing their homework. They are not doing their homework. So.
Yes, sir. Dr. Wolf, just to make sure we get to it before we forget, we've included a link, all your links to your social media, to your website. Anybody watching, check out the description for web links. You can buy the book on Amazon, everywhere. What would you say, Dr. Wolf, if there's any most important thing that you want people to take away from your grandparents' story, from your parents' story, what would you say? What would you say?
We talk about our neighbors. Well, there's 50 messages. There's 100 messages in the book. Determination, survival, integrity. It's important to have integrity, sense of team play, a sense of the determination and hope. And we all go through really, really hard times sometimes. But my dad was a prototype for that need to survive, for being able to take the risk. But again, don't take for granted what we have in the free country while we mess around with the nature of things. Because what happened to my dad could happen to any one of us. It could be a bad neighbor. It could be a bad local government, federal government, foreign government, natural disaster. Any one of us could be on the run. And not only escaping and being on the run, but also not knowing where you're going. No light at the end of the tunnel. Not knowing where your next meal is going to be or where you're going to sleep next. So it's a scary thing. I'm free, but free to do what? If the next guy sees me, I'm caught. So the freedom is sort of a relative thing. But God forbid it happens to any one of us. And I don't know how I could survive what my dad went through. I don't know how any of us could, because, I hate to say that we're soft, because some people are soft, I guess, as far as I don't know. Maybe that's a bad word because
We
we
say
have
that on this show all of the time, Dr. Wolf. You're fine.
We have military, we've got firefighters, we got first responders, we got physicians that are good, nurses. There's a lot of people here that are tough. Construction workers, there's a lot of people that are really tough and good to this country. And I'm just looking for more of that. I guess that's my message is why are we messing up? Why are we hating our neighbors? Why aren't we, we should, my parents used to engage with people that were from different countries, different religions, different wakes of life. They engage with them. They like to learn from them. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do with all of this is just spread this word against hatred, do a lot of podcasts, do a lot of presentations. It's only my little corner of it, but the book was so well done and has such salient points to it that you can't help but read this book. And if it changes one person a week or two people a month or whatever, I will have done my job. I'd be happy. And it did change my viewpoint. And I'm a conservative Jew. I'm not Orthodox or anything, but I believe in my religion. But I also believe in my brethren's ability to practice their own religion and go to their own mosque and church and temple. It's not the lessons are clear, and so that's my part of it. It's just try to do this, and it's not a fun job, and it got harder after October 7th. It's not. It's the realization of what's going on, and my parents wrote this in the 70s, and I worked on this since 2018, and I never would have had an idea that whatever happened 80, 90, 100 years ago would be going on now, and with all these uprisings. I would never thought that. And they wrote the stories as though they knew that this was going to happen, and they knew that I was going to reproduce it. And don't you hate it when your parents are right?
So Dr. Wolf, I've been sitting here listening to you, and it's what you say is compelling. I want to come back to the personal narrative, though, because I think, as the last of the Holocaust survivors die off, right? I mean, and these Holocaust deniers, sort of become more prevalent, especially with the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, if not around the world, right? This is really, however, a personal journey for you and your family. And I think it's that personal narrative that is so impactful and why the book is done so well. So growing up, obviously, your parents were educated and educators. And growing up, I mean, was this conversation around the dinner table? I mean, was this something, because a lot of the survivors from the Holocaust didn't talk about it. My father who served and my uncles who served in the war didn't really talk about it, right? They came home, they were what I call I think Tom Brokaw called them the greatest generation. I call them the silent generation, right? So on a personal level, you grew up with this. I mean, was this talked about in the home? I mean, your father, as portrayed in the book and as you've portrayed it, really became this so appreciative, jovial, good-natured, affable, person. I would argue in large part because of the hardships he went through. But what was the personal journey growing up like with your father, who had gone through this arduous escape, not one, not two, not three, but 4 times?
Unfortunately, I didn't think much of it when my first half of my life, because I was pre-med, and then I went to medical school and had my residency and fellowship and had a family. So the first half of my life, first 30, 35 years, didn't think much of it. My dad would mention it sometimes when he was in a big argument or a fight with my mom or me, but no sign of PTSD. You nailed it, saying how affable he was and how you would never know what he went through, because he went on, the punchline is he went on to deliver 10,000 babies in the Detroit area. And that's redemption indeed. You can never bring back your parents or relatives that passed, but it was super. And he loved doing it. He would have worked till the day he died. And I guess that's my big lesson from the first half of his life, is how jovial, how I had no idea what he went through, had no realization. They got me bar mitzvah, I had piano lessons, I was a pretty good student. I was lucky to have good parents. If you don't have good parents, you're really missing out. I mean, to me, you have nothing. So it was later in life, my mom started educating more people. She belonged to the BTM, a local temple sisterhood, and ords, and they were very active in the medical community and in the Jewish community. And slowly but surely, they educated. And my family and friends, whoever was around, whoever was interested in listening to the history, my mom loved doing it. My dad too, but not as much, because he was busy with his practice too, of course. So I really didn't get the zap until I read the book the second time. I might have read it 30 years ago, 35 years ago. Didn't think much of it.
That was their book, their first book?
That was their they wrote the autobiography in the 70s as though they'd happened. The events happened the previous day. It went from paper and pencil to typewriter to a computer to a disc. Dad passes in 97. Mom passes in 2016. Unfortunately, historian friend hands me the disc. I took care of Mom's affairs for a year, retired for a year. I'm back to part-time now, but a friend asked me to help him read x-rays part-time from home out of Michigan, which I'm still doing. And that brought me to the disc. It was sort of a Superman's kryptonite. It sort of summoned me. And as a radiologist, I know it's corny, but it's true. I mean, it just summoned me. And so as a radiologist, I've got two screens. One is the left screen is the patient list. The right screen are the images. And between cases, I loaded up the disc and turned the autobiography and dictated it into a biography, almost word for word, reviewed the history, reviewed the veracity of what he had, and spent a lot of time finding photos like the ones you shared. And then finally getting a good co-author to really turn the book into something special. So it's been a 6-year project, but now the book's been out for a year and change, and we're just getting going as far as I'm concerned. I've been privileged to be invited to the Long Island Holocaust Museum recently, so I'll be there in March. Mm-hmm. I've already done a book signing, and that's what it's all about, is meeting these kids and families. Did a great book signing at the Holocaust Museum in D.C. I can't tell you what an honor that is, how humbling and blessed. It's good, tough enough to get your book in there, let alone they ask you to come and do a book signing, and then they ask me to return. So I get a get out of jail free card. I get to go back, and I could do that every day, because talking to these kids, there's hope for this country. That's what I get from the families, the friends, and meeting people from all over the world in just a few hours, and getting that kind of support, and seeing those books fly off the shelves and saying, "I will get you for a presentation." That's hard. I mean, a lot of people say that, but that's what you're trying to do. That's where the pleasure is sharing the story with people that want to change the world for the better.
As speaking of Dr. Wolf's book, Not a Real Enemy, check it out. We've included the link to go get the book on Amazon and all of his websites and everything. So go check it out. Dr. Robert Wolf, Not a Real Enemy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. I appreciate the time, and please stay well and stay in touch.
Yes,
absolutely,
sir.
We will.
Stay determined. Fight the hatred.
If nothing else, we're determined, Dr. Wolf. I mean,
I can tell. Thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate what you guys are doing. I see what your episodes are about, important topics, not just a bunch of rubbish that we see on TikTok or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So it's
the important thing is to get people to think and to get people to question. And to ask questions and to speak up. I do want to end on one note, though. 2 notes, probably. The first really is what you really touched on was important, generally speaking, as a society, that we have lost the ability for civil discourse. That we have, I mean, just because people disagree on things doesn't make you my enemy, right? I mean, we can have passionate opinions on things, but we still live in the greatest country, in the world, in my opinion. Warts and all, right? Not a perfect country, I want to ask one question before I let you go. And I know, Ericka and the producers are trying to move us to the commercial, but, it's good to be the king is all I can tell you, or at least have your name on top.
That's a great line. I know that line.
Right. I don't want to get into the Supreme Court decision about presidents versus kings. We'll talk about that later in the show. But what I want to really understand in all, I have one real question is, give us your comparison, because you now, this is sort of a personal journey for you and sort of genealogical roots about the triumphs and the hardships your family went through to make you where you are today. Do you see any parallels? Because you hear this talk that this country feels a lot like Weimar Germany in the 1930s, and that may be an excessive comparison. I mean, some people would argue it one way or the other, but clearly the rise in anti-Semitism here has been unparalleled, certainly since World War II. Do you see any parallels there?
Good question.
Well, you summed it up. Thank God, 99% of people to me are. I don't like you use the word normal, but 99% of people think like we do. They believe in their family and their career and religion and vacation, and they think. But it's always the one guy who ruins it for everybody. The Pol Pots, the Hitlers, the Osama bin Ladens, the Fidel Castros. It's always one guy that ruins it for everybody. So to go back to what you said about a personal journey, I meant to touch on one other thing too before I forget. It's a very emotional thing talking about your parents escaping and being persecuted, but also my dad's parents dying in Auschwitz. Reading about it with eyewitness testimony, that's hard. When I did that chapter, I had to walk away from the book for like a week. So it is very personal. So the personal part of it makes it more. It touches me more when I see what's going on in the world. I guess that's the best way to answer it. It hits you where, like, hearing the word Aryan or hearing the words white supremacist, or even Hamas now. It stings me. It's got such a bite to it. So yes, it's personal. Yes, it's parallel. Fortunately, our government, our police, our military are still on all of our sides. We all have the right to practice medicine or practice our religion or whatever. And hopefully we can keep putting out these fires. And slowly but surely, I think it'll happen. I think things are finally starting to normalize. Although in Canada and LA, and I hear every day about things that are happening. So nothing's guaranteed. But no, I hope it's never the same as it was in the rise of Nazi Germany and the Nazis in Austria and ultimately Hungary.
Well, just wanted to get your opinion on it, since this is such a personal journey for you personally, but
Hopefully
not
never.
a real enemy, folks. If you don't have it, get it. It is a compelling story and a compelling read, and it's so important because it brings back not only Dr. Wolf's personal story, but if you take your eye off the ball in terms of the hatred that's out there and you let it fester, right? Never again is supposed to be never again.
No, it's so true. Never forget, never again, never too late, still fighting hate. And the big one is never again is now with the hashtag. So I don't know, those are words, but I live by them. A lot of people do. Their support, their support against hatred. We'll keep doing it. That's most people are like us. They like people. They want to meet people. They want peace. They want the best for their family. Whatever the case may be. It's just I don't know.
And never again is now only happens if we open up our mouths and we talk about it and we share the stories, read books, and go to things like Israel Appreciation Day. So we're going to cut to a segment. Let's see what is new with that
Go to Israel.
event coming
Everybody
in September.
should go to Israel.